Welcome to Bracket U, a college basketball bracket podcast brought to you by Delphi Bracketology. This is our 9th episode of the season. We are in our 8th year overall of bracketology work and wish to bring weekly or bi-weekly updates depending on school weather and COVID situations, but weekly updates to those who want to know where their favorite team stands in regards to the NCAA tournament. This podcast is for all of you junkies who have March Madness season all season long, and especially now as we get closer to March. We are able to create new content thanks to the sponsorship of Coca-Cola Bottling of Kokomo and the generous donations of our followers. Special thanks to Bob Thompson for creating our intro music and to Jared Morris of the Assembly Call for inspiring us to branch out and use new things and do new things. So we are now late January where everyone's going to start paying attention to college basketball a lot more now that the NFL is starting to wrap up. Brackets are still taking shape, and the obvious bracket means a lot more in March. But this is what we do. And joining me is Junior Cade Nelson, our editor of Delphi Bracketology. Cade, how are you doing this evening?
Good. Thanks for having me on.
Yes. So we had a meeting this morning, and we had about 8 people in there trying to answer quite a few questions. We meet for about 30 minutes on Thursday mornings. Don't have a chance to go over everything on the bracket, but we had several topics listed on the whiteboard and got out to the site. WarrenNolan.com is the site that we use. Credit them as well for a really nice page of net information. So in the next 25 minutes or so, Cade and I are going to be talking about how we came about our decision. Some of them we agreed on and some of them we didn't. The first one, Cade, was the top 2 seed lines. We were okay with our 1 seeds, pretty easy with Kansas moving in. We had Gonzaga, Auburn, Baylor, and Kansas. We really didn't have a whole lot of discussion. The discussion came with the 2 and the 3 seed line. Arizona for us is a solid 2, but then you had UCLA, Purdue, Villanova, Wisconsin, Duke, and Kentucky, 6 teams for 3 spots. Share some of your thoughts on which of those teams should be on the 2 seed line and which should be on the 3 seed line.
Well, I think, like you kind of touched on, that there's a lot of teams that they basically all have the same resume. So all of these teams could be taken into consideration for the 2 seed line. But I think the teams that we have right now in Purdue, Villanova, and UCLA, Arizona on the 2 seed line, I like where they're sitting. And at this point, it's just kind of about watching the teams that are below them to see how they do, to see if they can win more games. And especially with Wisconsin right now, we really like their resume and everything they got going for them. But like Duke as well, they both have double-digit nets. So really that's the only thing that's kind of holding them out. I know that we have UCLA in as a 2 seed with a 13 net, but especially Wisconsin with that net, we just like where they're at right now.
So the interesting conversation we had this morning was trends, and we always get a lot of commentary on Twitter. Well, the net is not a ranking system; it's a sorting tool. We're well aware of that, but you do look at trends because committees sometimes each committee is new, but sometimes each committee does act like the committee before them and the committee before them as well. When we looked at the last 5 years since we've been recording information since 2016, only one time has the top 2 seeds ever had a double-digit RPI back in the days or a double-digit net. That was Michigan State in 2016, and they were, I believe, a 12 at that time on RPI and were the 5th overall seed. You look at the reveals, the NCAA reveals mid-season here coming up in a week or two on a Saturday in February. They'll show what their first 4 seeds lines, top 16 teams would be. We looked back at the last 3 reveals, 19, 20, before the season got canceled to COVID, and then 21 last year. And there was exactly 1 double-digit seed RPI or net team, and that was Alabama with a 10 last year. So when you look at Wisconsin, who has a great resume, but a 21 net, you start to wonder how is the committee going to interpret that. You look at UCLA with the 12. You know, some of those guys you think are better. Duke. We at one point today, I think we had Wisconsin, Duke, and UCLA on the 2 line, and then we looked at that trend and said maybe Kentucky, maybe a Villanova moving up because of that seed list. And I think that's something that a lot of bracketologists don't talk about is the trends. Yes, the quality of wins favors Wisconsin. but the metrics were created by the NCAA for this sorting tool, and I think they rely on them maybe more than some people would like to see. So that brings us to our next topic, Cade, a good win resume versus a high net. Wisconsin, Marquette, Providence, Iowa State. We have difficulty placing those in the proper seed place because their wins are great, but their net isn't there, which is the problem we just mentioned. Talk about some of those teams and how we came to a decision on those 4 teams.
Yeah, so one of the teams that I thought was the most interesting and that we really had the biggest issue on deciding like where they were was Providence and Marquette. And Providence has beaten Xavier, Texas Tech, UConn, and Wisconsin. And those are obviously 4 Quad 1 wins, and they're 4-1 in Quad 1. So they're going to be pretty high in the rankings. But like we've said, they have this high net of 41. And so that is the reason that we've decided to keep them as a 5 seed, just because of that net. And Marquette as well, they've beaten Villanova, Illinois, Seton Hall, and Xavier with 6 wins in Quad 1 and only 4 losses. It's the same type of thing. We just decided to keep them here again because of that net. And obviously, once these nets drop, they might even have a chance at moving up even higher than where they're at right now. But just the hardest thing for us was being able to not psych ourselves out with looking at the net as much as we do. But obviously, like you said, the committee is going to use that rankings, and that is just the thing that we got to get past, and we just got to take in all the information, which makes it that much harder.
That is the toughest decision that we're making right now, what to do with this overall net ranking. We hope that it kind of balances out. I think with our update this afternoon, Wisconsin is a 19 net. But you have Iowa State, another team at 27. They have wins against Texas Tech, Xavier, Texas, Iowa, Oklahoma State, who could be a tournament team, Creighton, a tournament team, TCU, they lost to TCU, beat Memphis, who's not an NCAA team, but those are some good wins. And Iowa State's losses are to the number 4 net, 7 net, and 15 net. Those are 3 of their 5 losses. But when a team's in Iowa State, they're 3-5 in the conference, which conference record does not mean much to the committee. So 3-5, but a lot of people look at a team and say Iowa State at 3-5, how are they in your top 6 seed lines? Well, the quality of wins and the strength of schedule too. So good win resumes versus high net is something that we have to try to figure out. We would love just to move those teams up where they belong good win wise because we believe it's who you play and who you beat, not necessarily the math, but that is a part of the process. So, Cade, we also have teams with lots of losses that have some huge wins. Probably the toughest resume to figure out of where to put them is the Alabama Crimson Tide.
Yeah, so Alabama right now is a solid team that is really confusing us, but I think the fact that they have this many losses is because of their strength of schedule. They have the 3rd hardest schedule in the country, and I think that we kind of got to give them some leeway and almost praise for being able to still win these big games when the opportunity arises. I think last time we did one of these little podcasts was with Luke, and he kind of touched on the same thing. I think we were talking about Villanova and how hard their schedule was, but in almost rewarding the teams that play the harder schedules, that we just have to take into consideration how good all these college teams are and how well you have to play to be able to beat these teams is definitely a tough feat.
Alabama has played exactly 0 teams in quadrant 4. All of their teams, the lowest team that they've played is a 216 net, and they lost that one to Georgia. They have 2 glaring losses on the road at Missouri and on the road to Georgia that really hurt their resume, because if they were 15-5 with this record, but they've beaten the number 1 net Gonzaga, number 3 Houston, number 10 LSU, number 11 Tennessee. They've beaten Florida, who sometimes is in or out of a variety of brackets. Iona is a good mid-major leading its conference. Miami is another team that they've beaten that is a likely tournament team as of right now. So the wins are there, but they have 7 losses. And normally you'll see that maybe in the 8, 9, 10 seed line, but those wins stack up almost against anyone. But zero, I mean 0 quad 4 games. And so Gonzaga has played 9, is 9-0. Auburn is 4-0. These are 1 seeds. Baylor 6-0. Kansas 3-0. Purdue 7-0. Duke 8-0. Kentucky 8-0. Houston 6-0. Texas Tech 8-0. And then you have Alabama, who is 0-0. They have not played one single team in quadrant 4. And so I would, we can't do what we want, right, Cade? Because you'd put Ohio State up and I'd put Indiana a little bit higher because those are our squads. But I would really like more emphasis on the non-conference strength of schedule and the strength of schedule. And I do think the committee looks at that to kind of break ties of resumes that are somewhat similar. So, we were asked today on Twitter a lot about Alabama. Yes, it's a tough resume because of those losses. And in some ways they're an 8 or 9. In other ways, they're a 5, 6, 7 seed. That's going to be a tough one to watch as the season progresses because they're probably going to get a couple more losses. And where they end up is going to be one of the toughest things that we do this season. So we're based in Indiana. And so, Cade, let's talk a little bit about the Big Ten. I think there are 5 teams that are safely in.
Yeah, I think the 5 teams that are safely in for the Big Ten are Purdue, Wisconsin, Michigan State, Ohio State, and then Illinois. Iowa and Indiana are teams that are solid as well and need to keep winning games to make sure they stay in these solid seed lines that they're in right now. But I think the biggest thing for me in these Big Ten teams is how well and how solid Ohio State, Michigan State, and Illinois have been able to play. And just the fact that they've been able to keep consistently winning games and in a more strategic way, just not losing games to stay where they're at right now, to be able to stay on the 5 seed line where I think all of these teams are at right now. That's just crazy to see because of their strength of schedules. Michigan State's is 11, Ohio State 19, and Illinois is 28. And with these games, even though Illinois has the most losses with 5, they've still been able to keep their nets relatively decent. And that just means that they've been able to play solid and continue to play solid to remain good teams.
Yeah, Illinois is going to be the one that gives us a little difficulty because they've lost a couple games without their star, Kofi Coburn. They lost to Marquette. They lost recently to Maryland, but then they win a game without Kofi Coburn, who suffered from a concussion. So that kind of balances out a little bit. We think Illinois is in the 5, 6. You can maybe argue they should be down at a 7 because of their lack of quad 1 wins. But I think those 5 are pretty solid. And then Iowa and Indiana are in our bracket, but they have work to do. Iowa's going to play Purdue here in a couple hours as we're recording this on Thursday night. That would be a big quad 1 win as they are void of any quad 1 wins at this time. Their net is really good, but that's bolstered by a few blowouts where their offense and defensive efficiencies really were boosted by some of their non-conference play. Indiana got a nice win recently and then backed up a tough loss with a good win, a solid win over a quad 3 Penn State, but it really was good because they won by 17 and that boosted their net. Don't sleep on Michigan. I know you're an Ohio State fan and that bothers you a little bit. Michigan is 10-7, a good quad 1 win at Indiana. They're going to need to put a streak together, but they're sitting there at the 38-39 net, which is in range, heavy range for consideration with the Big Ten. Your thoughts on Iowa, Indiana, or Michigan? Those are the 3 teams that are either that are fighting to stay in or get in our bracket.
Like you said, that these teams just need to start winning games and especially get on a hot streak of games. I know we have Iowa and Indiana already in right now, but especially Michigan, once we've been saying it basically all year that we know they're a good team, and just once they start winning games, then obviously they'll be in like any other team that wins games. But I think just for them, the biggest test being in the Big Ten is having all these conference games and being able to win these bigger games that are definitely going to be the toughest games on their schedule.
So that brings us a little bit to a bubble talk. The bubble are those teams that are likely to be the last few teams in, 4 to 8 teams in. The last 4 will play in a play-in at Dayton, and the bubble also includes those teams that are just outside of the bracket looking in. And this is where our ranking system at bracketmatrix.com is really made. You don't want to miss too many teams. I think there was one year we missed 2, and a lot of years we just missed 1. Last year we missed Louisville on the bubble. But what you're finding, Kate, is some really big power teams that were thought to be good got off to really bad non-conference starts, but are pushing their way back into consideration. Right now, we've moved Arkansas, North Carolina, Florida State, Oregon back into the mix. And then those teams have proceeded to lose some games as we've moved them back in. Your thought on these power teams that are sitting in our 11 or 10 or 11 seed line?
I think these are all teams that, like you said, power teams. We obviously know that they're going to have the players and the ability to win games later on, and especially a team like Florida State. I think they went on an 8-game winning streak it was, and to be able to be back in the tournament, that's basically what every team is going to have to do to stay in the tournament right now. In Arkansas, North Carolina, and Oregon, right on that bubble, they just have to win the games that they're supposed to, and then if anything, just when a bigger game comes and maybe it's a tougher team, just if they're going to lose, just not make it a blowout so their net can stay at a decent range so we still keep them in consideration.
So some things to watch for on this list for our listeners or people viewing on YouTube. North Carolina, 42 non-conference strength of schedule, Oregon, 25. If they can balance out a few more wins and get some quad 1 wins, that North Carolina has 0 right now. So they're barely hanging in. They're both in our last 4. But those quality of strength of schedules usually are looked on when the committee selects their last few games. Compare that to TCU is 13-4. But they have the 335th non-conference, which there's only 358, I believe, teams. So they're at the very, very bottom of non-conference scheduling. And so their record is better. But we think Oregon and North Carolina will eke in if the bracket were selected this weekend or today, even before Thursday's games. Florida is another team that's been in and out of our bracket. They have 8 losses. They're starting to accumulate almost too many losses. They are 4-7 in the first 2 quads. They are in danger of being left out. And so, Cade, we've appreciate all of our followers on social media. We asked for some questions earlier today and got a couple nice ones. One talks about Iona, a mid-major. And the mid-majors have to win their conference tournament for the most part. There are a few conferences that'll get multi-bids. And then what happens when you have a really solid team in one of these small conferences and they get knocked off in their tournament? What level of resume do they need to get an at-large? A couple years ago, it was Belmont, who did not get the automatic qualifier, but got into one of the first games at Dayton. So Patrick Madden, really good supporter of Delphi Brackets on Twitter, interacts with us quite a lot. We really enjoy interacting with him. He asked this: is there a net ranking that Iona can reach which guarantees them an at-large bid? I'm going to phrase this question to you a little differently here, Cade, in a second. I don't know that mid-majors have a net that is an automatic guarantee, Patrick. Obviously, you want to get in the 30s. If you get in the 30s, if you can even eke into the 20s, I think that's very hard for the committee to look at that and say, okay, you had a great regular season, but then you get knocked off in your tournament, you can't get there. A 54 is not automatic. So, again, then the question is, does Iona in conference have enough strength of its opponents to move that net up that far? I think if Iona gets it in the 40s, I think you're definitely going to have to look at them. So, Cade, we have Steve Painter, our math teacher, is a very big fan of the mid-majors. He tries to put 4 or 5 in, and really he speaks for a lot of us that we like to see some of the smaller schools in the tournament. But it's so hard to compare their resumes because of their conference strength versus teams like Arkansas, North Carolina, Florida State that we said we just moved in. So how do you, as a member of this committee, look at mid-majors? What do they have to do to get an at-large berth if they get beat in their conference tournament in your mind?
I think like any team, they just have to win games and then be able to win the games that, they get opportunities to have quad one wins in. So I think the main thing I look at is just the amount of losses they have outside of quad one, because obviously if a team has 3 or 4 quad one or quad 3 and 4 losses, then obviously that's not going to raise their chance of being in the tournament. So if anything, in any team, I think it's more about the number of quad 3 and 4 losses that you have, rather than it is about quad 1 and 2 wins.
Right, and I think you're spot on, because the opportunities for Iona to get quad 1 in conference is probably not going to be there. They're 1-3 in quad 1, 2-0 in quad 2s for a 3-3 record, 500 record, 58th non-conference strength of schedule, and they are 7-0 in quad 3 and 7-0 in quad 4. So that really speaks of a possibility if Iona gets beat in their conference tournament. Would like to see that in the 40s, the net in the 40s, to be a little more sure of that. And then our last question is from Alan Bitkowski. Again, another bracketologist. I think he's going to join me on a special podcast, or maybe join us on a show one time as well. He asked that, knowing the Big 12 teams will have to take losses, can they realistically get 8 in the field? So setting that up, and I'll send that question directly to you, Cade. The Big 12 is a great conference, very competitive. They have 10 teams, 9 of which are eligible for the tournament. Oklahoma State is not because of NCAA violations. So that leaves 9 teams in the conference, and 8 of them are in consideration for us. And Kansas State was, until they lost a couple, and Kansas State sitting at 10-9. So Alan's question is, right now, there could possibly be, TCU's our first team out, there could be 8 teams in the Big 12. The problem is they play each other, and they're going to accumulate losses. So, do you think, how many Big 12 teams do you think realistically get in? And I think the number is somewhere between 6, 7, or 8.
I think 7's a good number, just because a team like TCU might have to stay out because they didn't really get off to a hot start in winning a lot of games early, like a Kansas or teams like that did. So if anything, it's 7, but I think there's definitely a chance that TCU still gets in, especially if teams that are in the bracket right now, they start losing games, then that opens up a slot for TCU to slide in. That I think playing in the Big 12, they have opportunities to win games. So I think they'll definitely be able to have the resume and the quality of wins to move up if they need to.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised either if TCU got in there 13-4, 3-1 on the road, 3-1 neutral. So that's solid. They're 2-3 in quad 1, 2-1 in quad 2, and no losses outside of quad 2. So that speaks of a resume to get in. Their only blemish is a non-conference of 335. And when you're looking at the last 4 byes and the last 4 teams in, the tiebreaker might go to teams that scheduled a little bit tougher. So I'm with you. If I had to predict, I'm going to say 7, unless TCU can pull off some, beat a Baylor, a Kansas. I don't know who's remaining on their schedule. I don't have it in front of me, but they do have those opportunities, as you said. So the Big 12 is great basketball. We mentioned that. By the way, we have a TV show, ISC Sports Network. You can find it on social media. They tweet out a live feed. Right now, it's been the last few weeks on Tuesdays at 6 o'clock. We come back with this on Thursdays at 7 or 7:30. We're also on iTunes and Spotify, this very podcast, to listen and get some update on your brackets. We may be doing a special bracketologist podcast as well, where I ask some bracketologists from around the country to join us. So we got to wrap it up here. The Mrs. Tonsoni has a virtual video call at 7:30, so I need to get off the internet for her. So we have a hard out here, but it's now time for our game winner question. So what teams, Cade, are you watching the most next week? And you can't name Ohio State. I can't name Indiana because those are our squads. But what teams are you watching that are in the bracket that have caught your attention as teams that you would tune in to watch?
The teams to watch for me are definitely Marquette and Providence. I know we talked about them earlier and everything, all the troubles that they've given to us, but I think that's what makes it fun to watch them, is because once they start getting wins or losses, it starts to kind of clear up the murky water that they've given us right now, and then it makes it our job easier to sort them out and put them in the right spots that they need to be in for us to, have a good bracket when the final decision comes.
I like those choices. You kind of took some of mine, so I'll go elsewhere. I've talked a lot on the television show about San Francisco. They have a really good game against St. Mary's. They're going to have to win some of those top-level conferences and games in the West Coast Conference to get some quality wins. So I'm going to be watching San Francisco. I'm also going to be watching Wake Forest. My man Jake LaRavia, I said it on ISC Network, went to Indianapolis High School, then went to Indiana State, and watched him there. And then he transfers to Wake Forest, a good Indiana guy. And Wake Forest is really doing some work in the ACC. They might be able to get in the tournament right now. I think they're an 8 or 9 seed for us. So for me, it's going to be Wake Forest and San Francisco. So, well, Cade, that'll do it for this episode of Bracket U. We'll be back soon, hopefully next week. We're counting on it next week. Check out our website, DelphiBracketology.com. Follow us on Twitter at Delphi Brackets for updates and information. And let us know what questions you have. We'll try to address them here, or maybe we'll just address them on the on Twitter. So you can also check out our donation page where we buy these guys T-shirts, food for our meetings, and keep up the website costs. If you're interested in check out our donation page. So until then, may your team win all the big games.